Alright guys, coming up in this one, I'm going to show you how to take one-off aluminum forms such as these and make carbon fiber one-off custom parts such as these. Alright guys, so before we get this video started and I show you how to do this, this isn't how we would normally make a part. This project came about because our friends over at Professional Awesome were having us make a splitter for one of their customers. They also wanted these aluminum forms turned into carbon, so while we were doing the splitter for them, we figured why not? It'd be a good chance to show you guys a quick, easy way to make one-off parts. Again, normally if you were doing multiple parts, you would make a mold. The technique I'm about to show you is it eliminates that whole mold step. So basically these aluminum forms, you could use sheet metal, anything really, become your mold, but don't expect to make more than one part off of it. There's a very good chance that the aluminum form or mold, we can maybe call it, will get destroyed. So yeah, I wanted to just put this little disclaimer in the beginning of this video just so you kind of know, why we're doing it this way. Normally you would have a mold, like those are our Corvette Canard molds. So yeah, this process or these techniques have a place. So yeah, if you can use it, if you learn something, great. If not, hope you enjoy the video anyways, so let's get into it. Alright, so very first thing we're going to do is clean them off. We got to figure what side we want the finished part of the carbon on. Because if you look at it, if we lay it up on this side, the unfinished layer of the carbon will be on the outside. I hope that makes sense. So we got to lay it up on the inside. This is basically taking the place of a mold. Something like this, remember, is pretty much like a one-time use thing if you're making a one-off part. We wouldn't use this method if we are making an actual part that we want to produce multiples of, but for a little one-off onesie, for something this kind of specialized or custom, it'll work fine. Alright, yeah, so now we know we need to clean up the insides of all of these. Like this one, there's like some smudges and stuff on it, so just a regular wax and grease remover should take off any like smudges, oils, grease, whatever. You just want to make sure this is pretty clean to get started. Alright, so now everything's clean. Time to start waxing. The wax we use is this Part All Paste number 2. So mold release wax, this stuff is specifically for composites. So I'll put a link to this stuff in the video description below. You should be able to get it off of Amazon. And yeah, like I said, the fun part, we need to do, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 coats of this stuff. So I'm obviously not going to record every one, and you need about a half hour between each one. So yeah, over the course of today, I'm just going to wax these things 5, 6 times, just leaving that time between each coat, and then we'll kind of get into the follow-up steps. Now you want to make sure you get good coverage over everything. And I'm going to stop after 2 parts, because if this stuff sets up and gets too hard, it's extremely difficult to get off. And the finished part will end up with basically the streaks of the wax in it. So yeah, you don't want to let it get too hard. Buff it off kind of quickly. Alright, gotta do the larger pieces and then just multiple coats over all of them. Alright, so I just finished the 5th coat of wax on these things. So now what I need to do before I do anything else is use them to make a template to cut all the materials. I am going to vacuum bag them. If you don't have a vacuum pump or you don't want to get bleeder, peel ply, vacuum bag, gum tape, they're all the consumables you need to vacuum bag something. You could just do this with a wet lay, which is basically just put epoxy on the put epoxy on the part, put the carbon on it, and just kind of let it set up. But yeah, this is going on a car that is, I think it's like a half-mile car or something like that, and it's kind of a nicer build, so we will vacuum bag it to really compact those layers and pull out the excess resin just to make them a little bit lighter. They're small parts, it's a couple ounces, but yeah, we just kind of want to make these a little bit nicer. So yeah, so let's get the materials cut, get our stack built, and then kind of keep moving with it from there. Alright, so as you saw, I just cut all the consumables. So what we have is each one of the parts is going to get a piece of a regular 5/7 2x2 twill. And then the big ones, since the large ones, there's not too much curve to them and there's just much more surface area, I guess. They're gonna get 2 layers of this 12K, which is a thicker material, and you can even see it looks a little bit different. So each individual thread is larger. It just kind of lets you build up the material or the part with less layers but the same carbon. That should make sense. And then our bleeder and our peel ply and bleeder. So we're not going to make a vacuum bag right now, just because in real world time I got to make a few other parts. So I don't want the vacuum bag just kind of laying out and around or whatever. I usually cut them right before I make the part. So yeah, I'm going to go get a few other things done, but then hop back on these and kind of show you how we're going to go about doing these. Alright, so I just mixed up enough epoxy. We're going to do them all in one shot in 2 separate bags. Materials are just off screen here, and then we got our bags ready to go, so everything's ready. Alright, so we always use a foam brush to wet out the surface, so that way we don't have to worry about bristles from, a regular brush kind of getting stuck on the mold surface, or, the part surface. Always want to check the surface of the carbon you're laying down just to make sure no little loose strands or little tiny pieces or anything are on it when you lay it onto the mold. Grabbing this piece of cardboard, because as you can see, this surface, this is where I do all my layups. All these little strands and stuff, I just don't want them to kind of snag the part or the carbon or anything, so just changing it up a little bit, because normally we have a mold which has plenty of, flange or surface area. It's not an issue. These, I just don't want it to be an issue. So this is our first backing layer, which is the 12K carbon, the heavyweight carbon. So you kind of want to wet it out a little bit more just because it's much thicker. You want to make sure you get good saturation. And then our final backing layer. We got good saturation, we're nice and wet out, no dry spots. Got a little chunk of carbon. Alright, so since we're going to bag these in pairs, we're going to do the other one real quick. Make sure the surface is clean. Again, back to our foam brush so we don't leave any bristles. Alright, so now goes our consumables, which is our peel ply. And last but not least, our bleeder. The bleeder does two things. It allows the extra resin, once the vacuum pressure squeezes it, to kind of absorb into it, pulling out the excess resin. But it also creates basically little channels for that vacuum pressure to make it across the part. If we didn't have this, you wouldn't be able to get vacuum pressure on the back end of the part if the tube was over here, for example. So you want to make sure you have, you know, a good bit of bleeder, and when we put it in the bag, you'll see me put just like extra strips like on the end, just to get that vacuum pressure evenly across everything. Take a trip down to the oven. There's the extra bits of bleeder that I was talking about. So that way we'll get good vacuum pressure across all of them. Alright, we'll get the vacuum going. Alright, before we get too much pressure on it, just want to check the back to make sure none of the carbon or anything slipped under. Again, being an aluminum form one-off mold, we'll call it, there's a high likelihood that something like that could happen. But I think we look pretty good. Now we'll do full pressure. Alright, looks pretty good. You can see it wetting out. So you can see the extra epoxy kind of getting sucked into the bleeder. Here's our extra little bit carrying that vacuum to the parts. So it's a little bit cold. If we give it a little bit of time, it'll wet out a little bit more. So I'm gonna jump on the smaller parts real quick, get them knocked out before the epoxy kicks. And then after that, it's just, you know, they spend about 2 hours in the oven to cure, and then we'll pick this up once I kind of pull them out and start demolding. Alright, so I'm gonna record sucking down these smaller parts. Just because there's so much curve to them, you really want to make sure you push the bag and all the materials into that curve. Otherwise you'll get bridging, and that bridging could kind of pull on the aluminum form in a weird way where you'll end up with something way off. The finished parts are pretty thin, so if it's not 100% the exact curve, there'll be plenty of like flex, I want to call it, in the finished part. They're just a little finish panel. They don't need to be, you know, rock solid. So let's get on to this. Check the back, make sure nothing slipped under the aluminum form. I think we're good. All right, same on that one. Cool. We'll give it full vacuum. You can see it start to wet out pretty quickly. Then you can see how much more these wet out from earlier. So you just give the epoxy a little bit of time for that pressure to kind of, you know, do its thing. So yeah, so right now we're just gonna close the oven, and then next shot will be pulling them out and demolding. All right guys, so I got the parts out of the oven. I had to get a few more things in the oven, so you didn't miss anything. Just took them out, took the hoses off. So yeah, now we get to demold them and finally kind of see what will be our finished part. Oh, well that was easy. That one fell off coming out of the bag. So there you go. So that means this, there we go. Easy enough. So there's our first two. I'm assuming these ones should be just as easy. And yes, they are. All right, there we go. We got to pull the consumables off. There you go. So this may or may not show up. Yeah, you can see the marks around the edge right here, which was, so this one or this one? There you go. So remember, this was the back of this. So these little tiny marks are these right here. So the finished surface of your part will always be a direct copy of the mold surface. So remember, these aluminum forms are pretty much taking the place of you know, a real mold. But as you can see, as easy as they popped off, these could actually probably be used again. Generally, they don't pop off quite that easy. And these things are so thin and flimsy, it's like, don't expect to get more than 1 or 2 parts using this technique. This is kind of just like a one-off custom, you know, you need to make something for your specific application really quickly. That's what this method is good for. Oh, so that's where I was going with that. These little marks will result in a little bit more of like a post finishing, but we should be able to kind of smooth them out. All right. So at this point, we're going to take a silver Sharpie. I honestly, actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Because the edge, you can see the edge very defined on this pretty easily. So I don't think it's worth tracing it with a Sharpie. You know, we're just going to trim them out right on that line. So let's go head to the trim room and get these cut out and polished. got these cut and sanded back to the edge, exactly where we want them. So at this point, we're just going to polish them, and then they're done. Alright, so I got the initial sanding done with 1000 grit wet sandpaper. That's why I'm not wearing a mask. It's just wet sanding doesn't make dust. So if you remember from a few scenes ago that the edges of these kind of had those sanding marks. So you can see how we kind of sanded them out with the 1000 grit sandpaper. Can't really see them so much. I'm probably going to sand these a little bit more, then go to a finer 1500 grit before we actually polish it. Alright, so we just hit them with 1500. They're looking pretty good, especially where some of the scratches were. Some of you might be wondering why we're polishing the part and not the aluminum forms. Since we're only doing one of these, you either polish the form or polish the part. If you were doing multiples, it would make sense usually to polish the mold or the form that you're making the part on. Since we were laying up in the female side of the mold, it's easier to polish the male side of the part than the female side of the mold. So just keep that in mind if you end up doing something like this, what kind of makes sense for your situation, because it'll be different depending on what you're making and the shape of what you're making. Alright guys, so there you have it. This is pretty much done. There's a little bit of haziness left. So that little bit of haziness off camera, I'm just going to hit it again real quick. So at this point, it's kind of up to you how far you want to take it. You could always throw more coats of clear, buff them back to get like a glass finish. Again, these are going on a race car, so they're right about where we need them. So that's where we're going to wrap this one up. As you can see, you know, we were pretty easily able to make these, you know, custom shaped parts. Again, normally this is kind of like a one-off thing. Since they popped off the mold so easily, we can maybe do another 1 or 2 sets, but if you have to kind of mangle up that aluminum or whatever your form may be, you know, you can only get one part off of it. That's kind of why we used some of the techniques and the processes that we did. We had to kind of take all that into consideration. Yeah, as always, I kind of hope you guys learned something, you know, can maybe use this to make your own stuff, make your own car a little bit faster, lighter, nicer, whatever. So if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of stuff, please hit that subscribe button. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. As always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys in the next one.